So, Jeff, I think we finally have our answer. You recall how we talked about the resurrection of Danchenko the other week. So, this is Steele's subsource, Steele's dirty dossier subsource. And there was this huge puff piece in Rolling Stone about how the Steele dossier was real after all. And they were trying to basically resurrect this guy, even though he has zero credibility, and even though he admitted that the whole thing was just garbage. So we were kind of wondering why. And now, of course, with all this new Russia hoax stuff, it's just part of that bigger scheme on the part of the Biden people, the Harris people, Biden DOJ, and so on. You know, that whole Democrat edifice that is trying to, just resurrect the idea that Putin is out there interfering in American elections to elect Donald Trump. That's essentially what it is.
Well, yeah, because now you're seeing with this new narrative that, you had some influencers that didn't even know they were being paid by Russia, but were paid by Russia. What they're really trying to do, I think, is extrapolate the Russia collusion argument backwards and say, see, we told you all along, for anybody who was beginning to doubt, it was always real. And therefore, Donald Trump has always been an agent of Russia. So I think that it's sort of not only in the moment, but also trying to look back so that everybody on the left has it firmly cemented in their heads that, oh, Donald Trump always was, everything they were telling us was correct. I've seen a lot of that on Twitter with people saying, well, I've been telling you for years. Well, bullshit. The people who've been saying I've been telling you for years, I've been, kind of the number one purveyors of the Russia collusion lie, just making things up and going with it. Anytime, we talked about this on a prior show, but anytime we see this come up, where out of the blue, you have a major story like this Danchenko story was with Rolling Stone, it's a long article, and it just comes out of nowhere. You don't maybe yet know why they did it, but you know that it was done for a purpose. And now, as of yesterday, we have that answer.
Yeah, we certainly do. So it's part of this new rollout of Russiagate, and I completely agree with you. They need to resurrect the idea that the 2016 stuff was actually real. Mm-hmm. And Danchenko is the biggest impediment to that, because Danchenko is the guy who told the FBI that it was all garbage. And we've talked about this many times. And so that in and of itself is then a huge problem, because what if people remember that Danchenko said the whole thing was garbage? Well, you can't have that. So now you have them out there in Rolling Stone saying, no, this was all real, and complaining about being a victim and all these kind of victim of these right-wing people and so on, and all that sort of stuff. So that's essentially what this is about. I completely agree with you. That's why they're resurrecting him. And, you don't even need everyone to read the Rolling Stone piece. People might say, well, only so and so many people read it. That doesn't matter. It creates a reference point for the entire media. They can all go and point to that, or they can just refer to it in some way. Well, the dossier was real after all. Here's the guy saying it. So that's why this was put out. And, finally we know.
Well, I was just looking at the Rolling Stone article, which if people haven't read it, they should go look at it. But again, read it with a very jaundiced eye, because it's written, it's actually extraordinarily well crafted in terms of accomplishing what they want to accomplish. Danchenko's made to look like a hero, and they shape it in a way that you're given this false sense of honesty on his part, that he was being honest throughout when Steele used him, but regardless, Danchenko didn't know anything. He wasn't a good source of Russian information at all. Farthest thing from it. But one of the things that they note in the article is how he was a victim of RT, Russian News Today, and that RT had texted out information, blasted out his photograph, kind of inferring almost like they outed him when that's not at all what happened. But they're demonizing RT, which plays back directly to yesterday when they're talking about RT, et cetera, being involved in the payment to Tenet. The group, is it Tenet? Is that right?
Tenet, yeah.
The media group that was paying these right-wing podcasters, who are far less right than you and I are. But at any rate, that they were paying them. So there is even a tie-in within the article back to the events directly of yesterday.
Yeah, very much so. It's very obvious that there was some coordination. Someone got a heads up. Someone got a
Yeah.
little nudge to do this. Um, we had another nudge here to do with the Kamala campaign. Um, they were focusing on one of these people who's now been sort of identified as part of this
Yep.
Russia, this new Russia thing, this Russian election interference. This is a guy called Tim Pool. He has his podcast, and to be honest, most of those people who are now allegedly the super Russian, agents or whatever, blasting Putin stuff, this whole garbage thing. Yeah, I'd hardly ever heard of any of these people. So, but leaving that aside, I did notice, like, a week ago or so, the Kamala campaign was blasting this guy called Tim Pool. I'd heard of him, but, I can't recall having watched any of his shows or whatever. But, okay, some guy supposedly on the right wing. I'm like, what's going on here? What are they on about with this guy? And then, lo and behold, he's the guy who's a week later DOJ implicates him in this idiotic Russia collusion scheme. Of course, there is that's the real collusion right there, where you have Rolling Stone being tasked with resurrecting Danchenko, the Kamala people being given a heads up about Tim Pool. That's that's the issue we ought to be talking about.
Well, Tim Pool was also threatening to sue the Kamala campaign, right? I don't think you mentioned that. If I'm repeating you, I'm sorry.
No, I did not. No, I didn't even know that, actually.
There within that what they were blasting out a week before, that kind of started gaining traction, got to Tim's attention, and I think he was sort of spurred on. My guess is he personally didn't really care that much, but it became kind of a thing on social media, and he went public and said he was threatening to sue the Kamala campaign. The next day, these allegations hit. So you can see this series of planning that was taking place. And that's just kind of a pattern within the DOJ and with DEMS in general, that you get kind of the tip of the iceberg, which I would say was the Danchenko article, and maybe a little bit the Kamala's campaign attack on Pool, because I'm sure they knew by then. They had to have. And then culminating where we are now, where the whole goal is to get this Russian narrative resurrected. And I mentioned earlier that Danchenko, that he was being portrayed suddenly as kind of this honest guy who was always telling a good story. And I come back to this one sentence in the article that is so telling. And it's very simple. During the trial, doubt was cast on Danchenko's competence in gathering information used in the Steele dossier. But FBI witnesses testified that Danchenko told the truth during his time as a confidential informant. Okay, those are two totally separate things. Yes, massive doubt wasn't just cast on Danchenko, it was proven. He didn't know anybody. He manufactured stories. Steele may have even run with them a little bit more than what he got. But Danchenko was providing just nonsensical information from, drinking buddies who had no contacts with anybody and portraying himself as being in contact with high-level officials. Nonsense. Every one of Danchenko's sources came around and said he's full of nonsense. We didn't tell him any of this. It's all nonsense. So it's more than just casting doubt on Danchenko's competence. It was proven. But then in the second part of the sentence, FBI witnesses testified that Danchenko told the truth during his time as a confidential informant. Yeah, when he got hauled in by the FBI and made a confidential human source as a means to hide him from the press, Danchenko told the FBI the truth. And that was a huge problem. He told the FBI that everything that he gave Steele and all these stories that were used were nonsense and it wasn't true, and it ripped out the entire underpinnings of the Steele dossier. It rendered the Steele dossier useless, and that's why the FBI made him a confidential human source and hid him from anybody's sight until you guys found him. If you guys hadn't found him, I'm not sure anybody would know who Danchenko is to this day.
Yeah, Rolling Stone lied about that too. As you alluded to, they made it look as if other people, within the government identified him. That is not true. The government did everything it could to hide this guy
hide him. Yeah.
for 4 years. And I agree with you. If we had not found this guy, no one probably up to this day would know about him. And this whole part of the dossier hoax would still be buried. And this brings me to the sort of the wider issue. Again, the article doesn't talk at all about the fact that Danchenko disavowed the dossier. So what he told the FBI in January of 2017, that these people that supposedly told him these stories, they were just joking. This was just said in jest. This was just gossip. This was all done in bars over drinks.
Right.
That's what he told them. Now, we also identified these people, the ones he was telling the FBI were his sources. Well, I don't think he told the FBI they were his sources. He basically told the FBI these are his drinking buddies. Well, we also identified the drinking buddies. That no one talks about that part of it. And then the drinking buddies who we identified were deposed in a case in the D.C. courts. That was the Alpha Bank case, and every single one of them, under oath, swore that they never told Danchenko any of these things. So even the drinking buddy story is probably made up. But even if it's not made up, that still doesn't help the dossier, because either it's just gossip and just stuff said in jest among drinking buddies, or it's just completely made up. Those are the only two options.
Yeah, I mean, some of these guys said that they haven't talked to Danchenko since, years.
Yeah.
And others said, what are you talking about? Yeah, we got together in a bar someplace, but I didn't tell him any of this. And it was to a man, and as you said, it was under oath. Moreover, for the most part, Danchenko said all of that himself. So, you've in terms of what he told the FBI, I'm talking about.
Right, yeah.
And so you've got it coming from two different fronts. And again, people shouldn't escape the fact of what the FBI did is they identified Danchenko. And as soon as they identified him, before they brought him in, they made him a confidential human source. And they paid him a lot of money, almost $500,000, a lot more than Steele was paying him. Then they brought him in, they gave him Queen for a day, which is, that's very rare to get. It's basically saying, okay, you got a day to answer us honestly, tell us everything you know, and you're not going to be prosecuted for anything. So it's a get out of jail free card. Well, of course he took it. Told him everything that he knew. He's now got, he's paid, I think it was $435,000, something like that. It was, but somewhere in the $400,000, close to $500,000, a lot of money. And basically then that takes him out of circulation. And nobody in Congress, Devin Nunes, who was investigating, nobody can find this guy. Why? Because if they found him, they would know right away, just from his bio, his basic background, that everything that he supposedly told Steele that was in the dossier was false, and the dossier couldn't have been weaponized against Trump.
And so the mere fact that this guy admitted that the whole thing was garbage is such a huge problem that it's kind of beyond egregious. It's just absolutely outrageous that Rolling Stone would have run that piece not mentioning any of that, instead mentioning that, oh yeah, probably the dossier was true after all. And even worse, the entire role of the FBI in this, in covering it up, is again not mentioned. No one raises it. And so instead, they're trying to resurrect it despite this evidence existing in plain sight. That is just, it's so frustrating. Now, on that point, we should mention that we had an article out this a few days ago about this, where we talk about another new discovery to do with Danchenko and the FBI. This is completely new research. So what happened in a nutshell, and I'll come back in a moment as to how this ties in with the bigger picture. But what happened is that there's a new FOIA release. Now, the FOIA release is not yet public because the person who got it hasn't released it yet. But anyway, we got so let's call it an advanced copy or whatever. And what the FOIA release is documents that the FBI gave to Inspector General Michael Horowitz. Now, remember, he wrote his report about the Carter Page FISA abuse. So there was sort of touch points that might have involved Danchenko as well, because they used Danchenko to get the FISA.
Yeah.
So Michael Horowitz's office fought these FOIAs for many, many years, and then finally they're out. And I hope they're going to be out publicly so everyone can kind of take a look. They're not for us to release, so we can't do that. But the person who has them will hopefully release them.
Although we do have a copy of a salient page in the article.
Right, yeah, we have the salient page is on our truthovernews.org site. You can have a look at it there. Now, so Michael Horowitz finally handed over this bundle. And most of it is just totally kind of stuff we already knew, like nothing interesting and so on. And then, a friend of ours noticed something, goes by the name of Walkerfire. You should follow him on Twitter. So Walkerfire discovered something very interesting. The page numbers that the documents are given, there's a little break among them. And the break is 57 pages, and it just comes at a very interesting point within the bundle. And we all know, well, us Russiagate kind of researchers know, there's only one document that is 57 pages, and that's the FBI's interview notes of Danchenko. Well, we always talk about the 57-page document. So immediately we're like, ooh, this is interesting. Was this part of the FBI bundle that the FBI was sharing among themselves? And we'll get back to that, why that's so important here in a moment, that they then gave to Horowitz, but they didn't give to Horowitz. They left it out. Intriguing, isn't it? And then I did the infill. We can put it up here. So you fill in the letters as best you can, trying to guess what the word is. And guess what? Igor Danchenko fits perfectly in relation to this 57-page document. Anyway, so we can be pretty sure that the name Igor Danchenko, as well as his transcript within the FBI, was shared within the FBI. Now, why is this so important, and why are we talking about all this? Well, this is so important because it means that lots and lots of people within the FBI, well, at least two more, the sender and the recipient of this email that we now have, but probably many, many others, knew exactly what was going on, namely that this so-called dossier source wasn't a source at all. He was some guy in Washington, D.C., and that he had disavowed the dossier. And yet they all participated in the cover-up. So the resurrection of Danchenko isn't only done to, resurrect this whole Russiagate idea, but it's also done to, once again, protect the FBI from treason. There's no other word for it. If you know that the whole thing is a lie, but then you let the country be torn apart over that lie. You had the whole, Mueller hadn't even happened by that point. All of the stuff that happened during the Trump presidency had not happened by the point when the FBI was sharing this around internally. What would you call it? I mean, I don't see any other word than treason.
Absolutely. And I mean, this all, the importance of this is oftentimes doesn't get enough attention. And it comes at a crucial focal point in time. And you're right, going back to who knew, that was one of the things that the FBI did. Not only did they silo Danchenko by making him a confidential human source, but they portrayed it as a very tight, small group of FBI officials who actually knew about this. And now we find out that, Jennifer Boone is on here and she knew, and there's multiple email addresses. So obviously it spread much further beyond than what they were telling us. And everything kind of came together. It began for me, a lot of people talk about the 2016 timeframe. I talk about the 2016 timeframe. But the real effort against Trump began after he won the election, and it probably happened on January 6, 2017 in Obama's office, when there was the meeting with Comey and Brennan was there and the ICA was delivered and the Steele dossier was attached. And that was, I think, the moment when sort of the go orders were issued. Okay, now you can really go after Trump. And part of that was pulling in Danchenko because they knew that they wanted to use the Steele dossier. And if you have any doubt that they wanted to use the Steele dossier, it was attached to the intelligence community assessment. So, that was given to Obama on that day. And they needed that to remain valid in the public's viewpoint. It was leaked, a week later out through CNN and BuzzFeed, et cetera. That's a whole separate story with Jake Tapper getting very upset that the story BuzzFeed leaked it first. It was really probably not meant to be leaked. It was probably meant to be mined. But that began the beginning of really what I think you and I both sort of think of as a 3-month compressed time frame of an incredible coordinated attack on Trump. Most of it led by Comey. And that kind of culminated. They got they went and they found Danchenko, they identified him, they siloed him by making him a CHS. Then Comey goes before and has a congressional hearing. Well, first of all, he notifies the Gang of Eight, something that John Brennan did 6 months ago. Comey finally notifies Congress. So what's he really doing? He's planting the seeds that Trump is a Russian agent. Then he goes before Congress in an open hearing that's televised and openly tells the world that without explaining anything, just tells them that the FBI has an open investigation into the Trump campaign. I mean, it's difficult. You kind of have to mentally place yourself back in that time frame. But that was earth-shattering. I mean, that was the kind of news that almost ended the Trump administration in those early months. And so, this is how Danchenko ties in. He was vital to all the attacks that were to come on Trump. And it was those short 3 months where all of it unfolded.
Exactly right. And what's so important in the lead up to Comey's public testimony were the briefings, the congressional briefings, both the Gang of Eight as well as a kind of a talking point memo that the FBI issued. And those briefings were entirely based on all this Steele stuff being good information. First of all, they called Steele Crown, again, to suggest that he's this British agent and this is a friendly government giving a heads up or whatever. Of course, we know the truth, and they knew the truth. I mean, this was a paid operative of the Hillary Clinton campaign. But what is worse, apart from calling Steele Crown, is the fact that the briefings made it look as if the entire dossier was at worst still being kind of investigated and at best absolutely terrible for Trump. Mm-hmm. What they did not say in any of these briefings, what Comey didn't say, is that by this point, this is March of 2017, 6 weeks had passed since Danchenko had disavowed the whole damn thing. Okay, so we knew all that, and we knew that this was treacherous, and we knew all that. What we did not know until here a few days ago, and I think this is so significant, is that this wasn't just one or two people at the top of the FBI. This wasn't just Comey scheming. This information about Danchenko was far more widely spread within the FBI. And that means this entire scam just ran far wider than, even we'd assumed. You always assume that with these kinds of scams, these kinds of conspiracies, that there's only going to be 2-3 people, because if you have a lot more people, then someone's going to talk. Well, they didn't talk. And it was their duty to say something, because the whole purpose of these Comey briefings was to get Mueller, which is exactly what they got. And then the country was torn apart over a lie, which the FBI knew was a lie from the get-go. And there's still no accountability whatsoever on that front.
And I mean, that's an element that you and I have been discovering with increasing frequency, that we found that the information that we thought was sort of limited to X number of individuals was actually spread much further. And frankly, that's a lot more frightening, because what it implies is a unified organization that automatically knows and is operating as one, that we can't let, there wasn't anybody within the FBI that was looking at this and going, oh my God, we can't be doing this. We know this is wrong. It's blatant. We know Danchenko was lying. Nobody was doing that. They were all automatically part of it. So it's this, and that just the idea that it's just a few bad apples at the top of the FBI is nonsense. It's polluted throughout the entire organization, and they operate as a single entity. You don't even need to tell them to be quiet. They know to be quiet. It's like you said, under normal circumstances, all of this stuff would have been leaked out in some way, shape, or form, and yet none of it was. And there's only one answer for that. One other item that came out during that time frame, although at the tail end of it, was sudden news about the Carter Page FISA. That was also, that started getting leaked. Washington Post got a hold of it, and all of that spilled forth, and it just kind of cascaded. It was a torrent, an onslaught of news.
And because all those perpetrators not only got off scot-free, but now have gigs on MSNBC, CNN, and so on, there was not only no accountability, but there was basically a giant whitewash. And this has allowed us to be in this position now in 2024, 8 years later, and everything is being recycled again.
It's like this pervasive virus that's being resurrected. It's like we're in part 2 of the pandemic. We went through the Russia collusion pandemic, and now it's come back. And the way that they're doing it is, again, to cement the fact, not the fact, what they're trying to do is cement the lie that Russia collusion was always accurate, when in fact it was not. All of it's a lie, including to this day. But they're using the current events to also not only to put it forth right now, but to make it look like it was always this way and we were always correct. It was always, the Russia collusion wasn't a lie. It was actually, a fact, and Trump is guilty. They're really pulling out all the stops right now. It's something else.